Right. So the question is really on internal versus external. Are there contradictory policies, and will they, or will they incentivize contradictory policies to get high on internal versus external?
Well,
Tom?
I don't know if this fully answers the question, but one thought that comes up is, so there's an assumption in your question, which is that people feel safer when their state devotes more resources to its military. And that may be true in certain places, but I think there are just as many examples where people feel rather oppressed or repressed when, you know, sort of military spending and emphasis goes beyond a certain point. And certain segments of the population too, if the military is not actually one that is, you know, sort of an open and fair one in the way that it treats its own population. So.
It also depends on your theory of why states go to war.
Right.
For example, do they go to war because they're acquisitive and insatiable, which is certainly a theory in international politics, or do they go out of insecurity and fear? And those two different motives lead to very different kinds of explanations about how internal and external conflict will be related.
Right. Let's take the last question.
Well, the last thing that you said, motivation for war, inquisitive or, you know, grabby or insatiable, as you said. You know, those situations are often brought about through resource scarcity or temporary situation, an environmental situation that was not foreseen. A lot of the conflicts that we see, especially throughout you know, the global south, are a result of some kind of an environmental degradation. I don't place as much emphasis on resource extraction, but you could look closely to the future to see looming conflicts coming down the road. So I know that the GPI does lack an environmental angle to it, but is perhaps the panel's silence on it edification of that, or is there hope of somehow quantifying the environment in terms of how peaceful or how you know, violent the society is?
All right. So the question is really on how do we include in a quantifiable way the environment on the whole issue of peace and conflict?
I think that's a very good question, and I actually pulled some figures together. Natural disasters. I mean, if we talk about peace and development and the losses, the development, I mean, we always look at it, for example, from an MDG perspective. Countries affected by disaster and conflict, the two crises, that's what our bureau is doing. I mean, we have a correlation that those who are affected by crisis are the furthest away from the MDGs. I mean, it's also, in a way, a very simple observation. But let me give you some figures from natural disasters in the 1960s. We have an estimated loss of about 75 billion. In the 90s, that has risen to 660 billion. And now, 21st century, first decade, 960 billion.
And so just to clarify, Melanie, these are losses, GDP, global
yeah.
GDP losses due to natural disasters?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the same, what you say, the positive relationship, what you gain with peace. And I think, and what you see in a lot of places, and Pakistan is a good example at the moment, is that you have a natural disaster, but somewhere there's a conflict. And you have a risk of, I mean, you first of all have to go in with a do no harm approach, and you have to see that, you know, our assistance or interventions need to be framed in a way that they don't exacerbate already tensions, and that depends on who you give assistance to, who you give it first, and I think there are all of these tensions. And then you have the other dimension, which I think you refer to more, is, you know, conflict over scarce resources. And I mean, this is one part of the Darfur conflict. It's a big environmental degradation, and you have the whole drought that comes from the Horn, and you have, you know, you will see that even more and more over the next couple of years. But I think there's also a very positive incentive to create interventions. I mean, the whole conflict at the moment is political. There's, at the moment, what we can see, a lack of political will. So we have started to look at, how can we get some recovery activities going through an environmental angle? Because everyone agrees that, you need to protect the space where you're living. You need to, you can get people around that issue, and I think there are a lot of opportunities there if you frame this conflict environmental link in the right direction. There's a lot of work that needs to be still done, but I think there are some good things out, and we are, for example, at the moment looking into that. How can you, because we work on both issues, how can you combine the two, how making studies, how both of them interact, but then how can you create out of that, prevention, preparedness, but also contribution to peace building and peacemaking.
I'm just, maybe, I mean, my thinking on this is paper thin just right now, but one way to potentially look at it would be some sort of evaluation of resource cooperation in terms of linking it specifically to the possibility of conflict. I mean, you have, you have a lot of places where watershed management is increasingly important, on a multilateral level. You have the Mekong, the Nile, the Euphrates, all these watersheds that are, where conflict is really increasing in terms, or not armed conflict, but political conflict is increasing in the countries affected. Then on top of that, of course, there's global warming, which affects, you have to make some assumption about how much you're going to value that, but it certainly affects some countries more than others, and some countries are obviously more active in taking on the challenge than others. So it's one potential way to think about. You wouldn't do it in quite so blasé a way as to just say resource cooperation, but it may be possible to at least think about a way to evaluate that.
Very good. Zoe, do you want to have a last word there from GPI?
I do in a couple ways. First, I want to thank all of the students and all of the panelists. As Jake pointed out, it's a pretty remarkable experience to sit for a couple of hours and hear people talk about the positive and negative aspects of the work that you do. And I want to also thank everyone for being very thoughtful and inquisitive and critical. So thank you. If I wanted to address everything that's been said, we'd be here until December. But I think that there are a lot of sort of recurrent and things that we struggle and grapple with. There are also a lot of new ideas and issues that have been brought today. And I just wanted to make two really sort of point of fact clarifications more than getting into a discussion since it's 5:15 on a Friday. First, I just wanted to clarify that the GPI is very much diagnostic, not prescriptive. We do look at the previous calendar year, and I do agree that it would behoove us and our readers and the general sort of discussion to clarify the language about that even more than we already do, because I think it is very. I think Steve this morning talking about early warnings was much more what he was at the moment thinking about than what we have been doing with the GPI. The other is just a point of clarification again that we do not suggest that democracy is a correlate of peace, that the highly stable democracies do happen to be at the top of peace, but that well-functioning government is actually across the board the element that correlates with peace. So those were a few that came up in the discussion that I just wanted to clarify, but mostly very appreciative for the discussion, so thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Well, I'd like to thank all the participants for your great contribution today. I have certainly learned a lot, and if you could please also just help me thank the panelists for your great debate today.